welcome everyone to the Game Dev Discussion Podcast. This week we have the advanced environment artist, from Rocksteady, Ben Keeling. Man, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me.
I suppose everyone needs to know Ben is a very patient person. Obviously, last year I took a bit of a break from the podcast, and unfortunately, it was on Ben's episode we had to I paused on, and you've been very patient and very understanding. So I'm glad we could finally get this to happen, man.
Yeah, me too. It's been something I've been really looking forward to coming on and having a chat and everything. So, I've been excited, been preparing all those kind of things. So, it's great stuff.
Okay, so before we dive in, I think it's probably good to, for everyone listening at home, obviously this industry likes to be complicated and convoluted with everyone having different job titles and all these sorts of things. So a lot of people may not know or heard of an advanced environment artist. So could you just explain a little bit of the difference between that and what most people know as a senior environment artist, I guess?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so hopefully some people know with progression-wise in the industry, we tend to have a bit of a linear progression. So you often start with a junior role or move into, a regular environment artist role and then up to a senior position. But in the past, it's always been a thing where you couldn't really progress past that point. If you wanted to go into career growth and progression, you would be looking at moving into more management roles like a lead position. So a lot of companies have realized there's a spot there to sort of expand and help people with their growth. And I think the part that was missing a bit is the creative aspect. So being able to, if you're very strong creatively, you might not necessarily make that role sort of fits in. So I've always done a lot of teaching and mentoring. That's been something that I've done. So trying to be a bit more of a role model and mentoring people, students and things like that is where that role has opened up for me, basically.
It's funny you say teaching because we're going to get into a lot of this over the course of the podcast, but you do CGMA, you do tutorials. Like, is that something, I mean, at what stage in your career, like, I'm guessing you knew at some point that you were kind of, all right, I enjoy this side of it. I enjoy helping people. I enjoy teaching. Was there a point in your career where you noticed that, or was it just you took an opportunity and you're like, oh, I quite like that? Yeah, how did that come about?
Yeah, I think, in all honesty, I think it was when I was younger, because I used to do martial arts. Like when I was a kid, I used to do karate. Watch, like when I used to do martial arts, he'd like sit on the side and watch me do them. And I used to help people that were sort of a higher grade in belt wise than I was when I was taking the martial arts. And he used to always say to me, I think he'd just drum it in, be like, you are really good at teaching. It's something that you're just quite naturally, you seem to want to help people. And so that was probably where it first started for me, because just having that, like when you're younger and you're very, you're influenced by like what your peers and your family say, right? So that was probably a little bit more for me where that side came from. And then most jobs, I ended up into positions where I was just at the point where we would hit some sort of new trend in the industry. So it would be like, oh, substance has come around. And so I would spend some time in my personal life, like looking into substance. And then somebody would say to me, oh, I don't really know anything about substance. So can you show me? Or I don't really know how to bake like high to low, and you've just come out of university and you know how to do that. Can you teach me how to do that? So it just sort of ended up being that although I was more of a junior, a lot of the time the seniors or people in those positions who'd been there for a while would ask me questions about those new bits of software or new techniques that they hadn't done, basically. So that's what ended up happening.
Have you noticed it affect you as an artist much? Because I guess an example I think every artist can like understand is, when someone asks you, oh, what's the shortcut for something in the software? And you always kind of go, oh, I don't know. One second, I need to open the software and do the shortcut because it's muscle memory. And I found in the past, teaching helps you, like, you have to articulate all of these sorts of things. So is like teaching helped you as an artist much? Like, have you seen yourself develop your understanding of what you're doing objectively?
Oh man, so much. It's one of those things where I think, because a lot of the time people will say that you need to know your shit, right, to be able to teach it. That's something that's a message that I've heard quite a lot, I think,
Mm-hmm.
from people who teach. And so for me, sort of learning substance and everything, and then being quite sort of knowing the software quite well, I'll get like a series of questions when I've taught in the past, and eventually there'll become a point where someone will ask me a question I don't know the answer to. So then I have to go actively sort of go away and research the topic, or try and spend more time to figure out what it is exactly that I'm missing, or is there a better way to do this? This literally happened to me last week. One of the students I was teaching asked me about how to make some crystals, which wasn't really related to the topic that I was doing, but it was a really good question, because then I was sort of forced to need to like go away and think about what would be a good way to do that, and like do some research and figure out how I would approach it. And then that just pushed back into me as an artist. Like, it helps me to learn and grow and become better as an artist individually. So I think that's what's really good about it. Like, it almost forces me to be like at the top of my game all the time. So yeah, that aspect I really love about teaching, I think.
Yeah, it's quite weird as well, because like, even if you're just teaching like substance, you need to kind of have a wider understanding of like the rest of the field, because you can't just teach like your straight, like if you had like an objective thing like substance designer, it's
Yeah.
okay, I could teach designer, but I'm going to get questions that take me into photo scans. I'm going to have questions that take me into ZBrush or Houdini, or like all these surrounding topics. So like, you can't just know what you're teaching. You almost have to know like 30% on top of it, just so you can go on tangents naturally and then deviate back in. Because otherwise, like, someone's like, oh, well, how would you solve this shape? Oh, actually, I know you do like something to do with simulation, but that's not a great answer. Normally, what you want to do is be like, yeah, so you can simulate, and you can simulate in like Blender or any modeling package or Houdini, and like you simulate, and then you bake it, you can take it back into the package. It's like you need that extra little bit of knowledge.
Yeah.
So does that mean do you find yourself when you're teaching, you said you have to like deviate and sometimes go figure out stuff which you didn't necessarily know? Are you finding you're having to sometimes dip your toe into software just so you have like some context to it in order for you to be able to speak around it comfortably?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with CGMA is a good example, because although the class is supposed to be about substance and software specifically, it is an environment. It's sort of within the context of environment art. So although it's substance and learn how to use substance, it is about your sort of skills, or my skills obviously are more environment based. So a lot of the time what ends up happening is in the course, we have a live session. So we'll go through and we'll do like a Zoom call or whatever, and we'll go through questions that the students have across the weeks as we go through the course and everything. And one of the things that I always find ends up happening is they'll ask a question about just environment art in general. So then I often find that there's like, oh, well, they'll ask something like about Quixel Mixer, for example. It's obviously not related to the course. So then I go away and I do a bit of Quixel Mixer and learn Quixel Mixer. And then, or sometimes even just learn it in the session, like directly then, because I have to just have a play around and find my feet in the software as if I'm like a complete newbie to the software. So that is really fun and sort of scary, but challenging at the same time, because you get that sort of aspect of like, oh shit, I don't know how to do this. I need to like try and do it live. And then that becomes like really interesting sort of dynamic, I think.
It's it's good to do it live though, because it's one of the things I've really enjoyed about Kim Ava and Jeremy Estrelado both kind of stream themselves learning software, and I always found that to be the more useful kind of learning experience, because you kind of see how professionals thinking, because you're seeing the questions they're asking themselves, like, okay, how do I do XYZ? And I'm going, as someone watching, I'm thinking, oh, okay, if they're asking that question, that's the question I'll be thinking about. Why do they need to know that? Oh, okay, it's like for this reason. And it's kind of like seeing the professional learn and how they tackle learning software is very insightful. So the fact that you do it live sometimes, like, I think that'll probably be really useful to the students, just seeing you open the software, like, okay, I've never touched this. Okay, where's this function? Where's that function? How would I do this? Okay, this is how I would do it. Okay, I know how I would do it in Designer, but how would I do it in Mixer? Seeing it, I guess for a student, seeing that, it'll be incredibly useful. I mean, I know that's how I learn a lot, just watching people work.
Yeah, do you know what as well? It's the mistakes. It's when
Mm,
you do. That's what I find interesting about people like Jeremy's streams. If you watch those, it's when he gets to a point and he doesn't know how to do something, or he does something slightly wrong, or whatever like you would normally do. But often, if you'll post like a final piece of artwork, or you put it on your portfolio or something, you don't see all of those things that go into it. You don't see the time you're sort of like really struggling or frustrated when you're trying to find out how to do something you don't know or whatever. And that aspect for students, I imagine, is quite humbling because they realize, you're just as human as everybody else, right?
yeah.
You make the same mistakes and you do the same things. And I think that process part of it for sure is really interesting.
It's actually something I'm quite passionate about. When I was working at ArtStation, sorting out learning content, one of the things I'd always say to the instructors, we'd have a call and we'll talk about the software, and I'd always say, leave mistakes in, like, because I think one of the things I've found is when I've helped students through the mentorships has been they'd come to me and they'd be frustrated that they're not getting they're not going A to B, they're kind of going A and then getting stuck and they're trying to figure stuff out. And I'm like, yeah, but in this tutorial they're just doing it. And I'm always saying, that's not them. Nobody works like that. That's fake. Like, that's not how people learn. That's not how people produce artwork. Artwork is a series of mistakes until you get to a certain point. And one of my favorites, every ArtStation learning instructor, I pointed them towards a Ben Wilson tutorial for Jonas Renegade. He spent 20 minutes going down this route of a graph, got to a point and went, this isn't going to work. It isn't going to work for this, and this. And he deleted it and restarted. And for me, when I was learning designer, that was the moment it clicked for me. That I tried like 3-4 times to learn it at that point. And that was the time I watched it. And I was like, holy shit, he's just been 20 minutes of work for like this arbitrary reason. Yeah. And I was like, that was so like, I don't know what the word is, like relieving to see it, just to see a guy like, no, this won't work and I'm going to move on. And I think more tutorials like that, I think more learning content like that, like showing the game dev is about exploration, mistakes, finding out better solutions. It's something I'm very passionate about because the amount of students that have come towards me and they're like beating themselves up and they're really down, and some of them really, really getting on top of themselves. And I'm like, you're fine. Like them amazing portfolio pieces or them crazy good tutorials. That's not how the artist got there. There's no way in hell how an artist got there. They had to script that, rehearse it, probably had to edit the shit out of it to make it look like it's smooth, and it's probably like 6 hours of footage you're not seeing there. It's something I care a lot about.
I mean, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because like sort of things like ArtStation and having these amazing resources and learning and everything is really great for students nowadays because they have all access to this like wealth of content that's just brilliant, right? The other side of that is that you don't see the parts like the struggles, the difficult aspects unless it's shown, right? So, when I was learning when I was at university, I never had access to these tutorials where everything was super polished, everything was like made amazing. I was looking on Polycount and I was seeing like people just get ripped to shreds because even though their piece was good, they were like tearing it down. And then it was just compared to what we have now, where you see all this amazing, beautiful stuff on things like ArtStation. It's very different now, I think, for students learning. That aspect of it's definitely interesting for sure.
Yeah, it's such a weird place for it's funny. It's both the best and the worst time to be a student game artist because it's like great, like I said, all this resource, but Jesus, I mean, even I catch myself doing this sometimes. I'll look sideways at stuff that like Jay and John Joe are doing, like those killer props. I'm like, fuck, I can't even get close to that. And I'm like, like they've been doing props all this time. I've been doing materials. Like, you kind of that whole like stay in your lane thing, but it's hard to do even professionals who've been doing it for years. Like, you do catch yourself looking sideways at some of the cool stuff on ArtStation and you go, God, I can't do that. You can't do that to yourself because it screws with your head big time. It really, really does.
Yeah, I mean, I had a period, I want to say maybe a year and a half ago, where I felt really down about my own work, and I would look, and I think it was not helped by the fact that you could go such easy access and look at other people's work and be sort of blown away by these finished pieces and not see all the work that's obviously gone into them, right? And I just remember looking at my portfolio and I would keep looking at it and I was just like, I hate everything I've made. and I just couldn't look at it. Like I really struggled with it. And I think I was very down about it. And the way I managed to get over that was I just took a bit of a step back and a bit of a break, and then went out. It sounds weird, but I went outside with my girlfriend, and we just like went for long walks, and we talked about it, and we talked about where I want my art to go. Like, what is it that really like drives me? What am I passionate about? What do I love about 3D? And that, being able to understand what that was and why I was doing it. And then when I started to look back at my work, I didn't hate it with so much passion. I was thinking, now I know where I want to take things, and I know where I want to grow. So yeah, sometimes having such easy access to that stuff can be really tricky, I think. Like you said, with materials, for example.
And you feel like, I mean, I know for me, it was like last year, because that's what ended up meaning I had to take a break last year. It was like, I was really forcing art. Like, okay, I need to make work. And the amount of times I was making projects where I was like, the result was still okay at the end, but like it was such an effort to make. And taking that step back and just looking at it as, you know what, I'm just not going to do anything. Like, and granted, I went too far. I was doing 2 jobs, and I was like doing a podcast, and I had to sort of like put the halt on everything. I left ArtStation, stopped the podcasts. I was like, I'm taking like 3 months off. Fuck this. I don't need this. And now we'll come back, and we've got like a back to a normal level now. I'm like, okay, I can produce artwork, but I'm not going to force myself, only if I enjoy it. And it for artists, it's like, and I see, and even now, like, I've got some friends who are in my circle who are doing lots of stuff, and I'm like, back in my head, there's that little voice going, "Oh, if they're doing stuff, like what are you doing?" And it's like, "Oh, okay, I'll do some more personal projects again." I'm like, no, that's the wrong reason to do shit. I do it because I want to do it. And it's like, it's being an artist, man. We our heads are. I genuinely think our heads are screwed. Like, we have such a weird perception of our own time, of our own work. Like, objectively, if you go find a stranger on the street and be like, "Oh, I get paid to make art and like make games," and they'll be like, "That's fucking amazing." Whereas we're sat here like, "Oh god, the resolution on that roughness map, it looks so shit. Oh god," and you're kicking yourself about it. And you're like, grand scheme of things, it's like, man, I'm getting paid to do this. Like, we're doing all right. This is for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, perspective is always good, right? So you get that when you take the time away. So you had a little bit of time off, and then you feel a lot better about it. And I think I felt that actually because I seen your recent piece that you did with ZBrush materials and the cavern style environment. And I felt when I looked at that piece, I feel there's a passion and like it seemed like you really enjoyed it, like from what I could see. And I know you wrote a description about it as well, where you said you were having a lot of fun with it as well, which I think is, that's got to be a part of it when you're doing personal work, because you have this opportunity to do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. You can make a crazy sci-fi tower with, giant balls on the side of it if you wanted to, that are like perfect materials that you've made that spin around, demonstrate how amazing your material art is if you wanted to do that, and no one would question it because it's your work. So you can do whatever you like in that aspect, right? But it's very important to enjoy it, because otherwise, I know it's also great to be able to have a portfolio, and that's can be a reason to get hired and all these things. But also, if you're doing work for yourself, that's a really big driving force, I think, for sure.
I think I have a weird relationship in my portfolio in a sense of like every single piece is like there's objective pieces, right? Like, and I know I've noticed it with yours as well. Like, I mean, for me with that cave scene, it's like I could have spent another 2 months on that. There's some textures which are a bit funky. The landscape material isn't anything special, but I'm like, I'm done with this. Like, I got everything out the scene I needed to get out of it. And I know for a fact, like I've spoken to friends about this, and they're like, you could go further with it. And I'm like, you're 100% right. I could go way further with this. But I was done. Like, I was completely like, I'm going through the motions now. I don't need to do this. Post it. So, but actually, this leads us on to an interesting topic, because that's personal art. And now I want to talk about ArtStation challenges, which are still personal art, but they're kind of personal art that's been defined to you, right? I know, I mean, that's how I first came across you, is the Beyond Human ArtStation challenge. And you take part in them quite a lot. And you recently took part in the Grand Space Opera one. Came out great, by the way. Like, I love that scene. The robot and the lily pads and stuff, it all looks sick. Why do you like take part in them? Like, because I advertise it to students a lot. Like, look, this will give you criteria to work towards. timescales, all this stuff is great for employers. You as an artist, like I said, you could do anything. You said yourself, we can do whatever how we want. And you've chosen to do a challenge where like you've got some rules kind of defined to you. What's the driving factor behind you and these art session challenges?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question because yeah, we obviously based on what we just talked about, right? I think I mean I think it's for me one of the things I really enjoy about them is I don't really think about them theme wise, which sounds a bit odd. There's obviously a theme at the start, and then for people who don't know about the challenges, they have a 2D element and then a 3D element that comes afterwards. I never set out to take them based on the theme, if that makes sense. So I won't look at Grand Space Opera and think that's definitely a challenge I want to do. What I often do is find the inspiration from the concept. So if I see a concept that I really enjoy or relates to the work that I want to do, then I go for it. And I think because it's such a short time period, because it's 2 months, most of the challenges are 2 months long, it's a lot of pressure. So that aspect is good for me. I really like the sort of challenge of having to do something in 2 months and have people interact as the community aspect. I think is super valuable. Like you learn a lot and there's a lot of growth there, which I wouldn't necessarily get if I'm just working on my own stuff. So I really like that particular part of it. And the pressure to have to put something out when people are watching what you're doing is a really nice driving force for me. It like really motivates me to work on it a lot. So because I was doing with the Grand Space Opera one, I was doing an update every Sunday, and I was like very religious about it must be every Sunday. It's going to be this time, not this time, but this sort of period on a Sunday. I'm going to do the update. I'm going to sit and write it, and then I'm going to post it. Because I really also wanted to share my process. So I wanted to show for people who are watching it, if there were students or whatever, to kind of push back into the community as well as, help other people and all that kind of side of things. And so that aspect of it, yeah, I just get a huge kick out of doing that in such a short window. It's it's very rich in terms of what you get out of it in such a short period of time.
You know what? It's funny you mentioned the having the eyes watching. That's what I felt with. And I'm gonna preface this after with like, I guess the public service announcement, but like with the the recent piece I did, it was like I posted every time I did anything. Like I get finished school, just going on Twitter. Finish this, goes on Twitter, and it's just like it was just a wide place to like I guess blog or like keep track of my progress. And it was great. Like, you know how it is when people are saying, "Hey, you're doing good stuff," or this is looking good. It's like almost a dopamine kick to keep your momentum going on a project. But and this is the public service announcement bit. I think some people could be crippled by that, like expectation. I think maybe for us, where we go quite comfortable in our own skin and our ability to produce art, it's kind of okay, works out there, and I'm really happy it's out there, and I like seeing how people interact. Whereas I think some people are like, "Oh shit, I need to do something because like." I need to keep them in the loop, i.e., them, the community. It's weird, right? Like, because it can either cripple you or it can like empower you.
Yeah, it's definitely. I would say it's person dependent. So for some people, if you weren't super confident in your ability to do a prop in a set amount of time, you would find it very hard to do because you sort of need to project manage yourself and schedule yourself in an efficient way when you do a challenge like that because time is short. So you have to try and work out what's the best way to utilize the time. So you don't necessarily want to be spending like 4 weeks on a prop because it's sort of a waste of time in terms of the grand scheme of the challenge, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely a balancing thing. And yeah, I don't know. It's funny because the first one I did, I made so many mistakes. And this time round, the way I approached it was like almost like night and day compared to what I did the first time round. Like the difference the second time I did it, like the first time I was really prop focused. I was trying to do, a scene with a lot of individual unique assets in it. Yeah. This time round, I'm just like slamming in trim sheets here, there, and everywhere, trying to like save myself time, all these like cheats and hacks I could do as much of it as possible. So yeah, that definitely, I think that helped me a lot with and even the scope actually, because I had purposely picked something that was like single shot because
yeah.
I knew that, I would spend less time if I did, rather than a fully fledged environment with everything going on. So yeah, for
That
sure.
that actually that point I want to talk about. I want to talk about this because it's the biggest, it is the most repeated point I have to make with it. I think every single environment mentorship I've done, I've had to make this point. And I think a lot of environment artists, experienced environment artists, do this because I'm the same. I now choose single shots and just worry about everything in that shot and about making this shot as beautiful as I can. Because okay,
Yeah.
we're not making a game here. We're not making optimized content. Like we're making art. And yes, you want to use real time tech and you want to use proper workflows. But every time, every mentorship I get on, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna look at concepts. I'm like, what's jumping out at you? And they pick out this gigantic God of War like cave with like all of this crazy shit going on, and I'm like, okay, I wouldn't do that, and I would like take like an eighth of the image. I'm like, that's what I'd do, and we dig through concepts. Okay, now we look a bit further. Okay, well, what about like this cave? And I'm like, yeah, but you got like walkways, and you've got like all this crazy stuff, crazy unique statues, and I'm like, again, you're one person and you got a lot to learn. Like you don't need to make a whole environment. Execute your art at an angle, and it's weird because it's like professionals or people who've been doing this for a while. We kind of get it. We know our ability. We know our limitations. I think that's where it comes from. We know our limitations. Like I can't do foliage. I have never done foliage. I'm not about to say right. I'm going to do a jungle scene. And it's going to be like a whole jungle I'm going to make. It's like, no, that's ridiculous. You've never touched foliage and it's a whole jungle you're going to make. Like this kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
They bite off more. That's one of the biggest thing that bites them, man. They try to bite off more than they can chew, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the metaphor I'd use to describe that is like, when you go to a restaurant and you have a really nice meal and you order like loads of things off the menu and your eyes are far too big for your belly and you order like something really delicious and you can't finish it and it's just basically a waste. It's like that type of situation because you see this amazing concept or whatever it is, this inspiration for a piece, and you get really excited about it, super motivated. And right at the start is when that really peaks because you're sort of like really engaged. You really want to start collecting reference. You do all the fun parts. Maybe do a block out, which is also the part where the process just goes really quick because you're doing like slapping in shapes and doing everything really quickly. And then it sort of peters off a bit, your motivation kind of like even again drops off and stuff. And so I think, that I see that a lot. And the piece of advice I give a lot to my friends is like, if you find a concept you love and you really want to do it, just don't do it. Don't start for like a month or 3 weeks or however long it is and just stop. Just take a little bit of a breather and then just go and do other things for 3 weeks, like work on other things or, do something completely different. Don't even start like blocking things out or doing anything. Just wait. And if you still want to do it after that, then it's a good bet. And I think what you said as well about the sort of size and scale of things with the one shot approach is very important as well, because I made a lot of mistakes that where I would, pick a concept and try and make a huge vista with loads of crazy stuff. And it's just, it's just too much, isn't it, in terms of what you need to show.
That safe house scene, one of my early scenes, like I made a whole room and all the props in there, and I remember that I got burnt out so hard on that, and it was such a, I didn't enjoy any second of it. It was just like it felt like there was just this mountain of work, and ever since then, like the Cerberus one, the anything like that, I'll always do now, just like one shots. I love showing students like because every time they pick up a big concept. And I want to make like this big room, 360 degrees. I always open my UE4 project. And I'm like, hey, look at this great angle for like Stairway to Heaven. I'll just turn the camera to the left and it's still black and horrible. And they're like, this is all you need to do. This is all the viewer sees. It's all that matters. And they're like, oh, but don't I need to show workflows and all this? I'm like, yeah, you can show your workflows. But like, I mean, also I'm quite robotic in the way I approach projects. I don't know about you, but I'm like, what am I going to get out of this project? I need to have like so Stairway was like, I want to do two things. Replicate a photo one-to-one, like try to capture the mood directly. And I wanted to just use Megascans. I wanted to just only use Megascans and Mixer and the decals they have available and just do that and just see how far I can get. Or like Cerberus was I wanted to make a rain shader and replicate a more painterly concept. Most recent one, obviously ZBrush. I go in very binary and kind of like, okay, what is my return on doing this project? I tend not
Yeah.
to get to I guess it's quote inspired. I don't see a concept to go, oh, that looks really cool, I'm gonna make that. It's more, oh, that's cool. What would I get out of that? Not much. All right, I won't do that. That's kind of the way my brain thinks. Is that the same for you, or like, how does your brain think when you see concepts?
Yeah, I mean, it seems. I think we're quite similar in that approach. Like that, what you're describing seems quite analytical in the way you're approaching it. Is like, what can you get out of it? What are you going to learn from it? And so, for most, only until probably very recently, I was exactly the same as that, where I would every single piece I would do, I would have something I wanted to learn by doing that piece. And so it could be like the example you used earlier, like get better at foliage, or really show off material work, or I would have like a goal in mind with this project. I want to do X, Y, Z, whatever, right? So, and normally, sometimes it would be a couple of things, but most of the time it was just one thing. So I didn't get overwhelmed with how many things I needed to try and put into the project. But I had exactly the same approach where every single piece I did, whether or not it was a piece of material art or a environment or a prop, was this is what I want to get out of it. This is what I want to learn. And then I got to a point where, not that I felt, because it would be a bit of an ego thing to say, like I felt like I'd learned everything, because that's definitely not the case. But I got to a point where there was a lot of the things I wanted to have tackled. I sort of tackled them, or I felt like I'd done a lot of pushing and things like that. But what's really nice is, because our industry changes a lot, new tech comes in, new things to learn all the time. So that list just grows. Like you end up finding new things to learn, or new techniques to look into, or go and learn more about composition, or try and do extra things about this particular topic, and then it goes from there. And then you find more things that you want to try and just push further and grow and learn more, I guess, right?
It's funny you mentioned composition. It's since I picked up like photography in the new year, and it's like, oh god, there's a lot. That's a rabbit hole and a half. Like I have a couple of friends who are very into photography, and like they've helped me a little bit, like sort of figure out a couple of the basics. And I've got my camera, and I've gone out, and I'm like, granted, I have some, like, I think every environment artist has some natural composition skills, like they understand Gordon ratios, rule of thirds, leading lines, all that kind of high level stuff. But I did it, and I was like, why does this feel horrible? Now, my friend Kieran is like he understands composition better than anyone, and he's like, oh yeah, look at this particular thing you're doing, and then this leading line, and then what happened to this angle, and I'm like, oh fuck, there's such a rabbit hole here, and I'm like reading up on it and finding it really interesting, and it's like, okay, this does kind of aid me in game art, like it will in the long term, but god, it's a whole other world, and it's like finding them things that you want to get better at, like actual broad topics, because for a long time it's material art for me. When I was trying to get into the industry, I was kind of like, okay, I'm really bad at materials, like that's my worst thing. I was like, right, I want to spend a whole year, I think it's 2018, all I'm doing is material art. I'm not touching any environments, I'm not touching anything, just that. And like this year now, I'm like, okay, I want to focus on composition and ZBrush. That's pretty much the two things I'm thinking about. Having them broader topics of like, I want to get better at this, I think it's very helpful to give yourself a bit of direction, right? Because like you said, one of the worst things is having a blank canvas of I could do anything. It's almost paralyzing. So like I can do anything. So like, what do I do? Whereas when you're like, okay, I need to get better at composition, right? That cuts out like what 50% of the concepts out there which have bad composition or not the best composition. And you're like, right, I'm focusing on this, and it can help give you some direction to what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, like it's funny what you said about the composition rabbit hole thing, because I also recently did exactly the same thing. I started. Like, I felt like I kind of know a fair amount about composition, but then when you look into it, you're like, I don't know anything about composition. And I started, because YouTube is a really good resource for just any video you want to watch about stuff like that. So what I started to do was just watch a composition video a night. Like I just watched one on YouTube, like pick something random composition wise. And I started because I really love Simon Stalenhag as an artist, as an illustrator.
Yeah.
And his work is like a huge inspiration for me. And I found a video that was like, analyzing one of his pieces. Like, it was one of those videos where it was explaining, why is his piece really successful, and then breaking down the different elements and talking about the reasons why it's a successful piece of art. And that was insanely helpful. Like, I watched that video and I was like, oh man, I kind of get why his work's so good, why I like it so much now, because I've seen the reasons like in this video and it's explained really well. And then I went further into this rabbit hole and I found this video that was like, I can't remember what the video was, but it was a guy doing shapes, and he was like drawing different shapes like squares, and then explaining how composition is a lot about contrast. So if you have like a square and then you have a shape that's like circular inside it, that's way more interesting than a square inside a square inside a square, right? So it was a whole video, and that's literally all it was for like 45 minutes, explaining about shapes. And I was just like, there's so much to this. Like, that's just purely about shapes. So it's crazy.
You mentioned Simon Sinek, guys. You need to check out his book. And actually, you just reminded me, I just invested in, I don't know if you can see this, Leah Wong's Tokyo
yes.
And you go through and you're just like, how, like, I've walked city streets. I have walked city streets at night for hours, and I'm like, you feel as if I'm never going to get a shot like that. And it's interesting when you see these guys, like when you read their books, you see them talk, and you're like, it's so much muscle. It's the only way to describe it is muscle memory or artistic eye. And I think that's what's got me down here, the rabbit hole of photography. Because like one day, I mean, one of the long-term goals is art direction at some point, like in 10 years or however long. I'm like, so much of it is just artistic eye, how you interpret images, how you interpret shapes, and you have to understand that stuff. So, and you're right, Simon Stanley had is like I've got his book on the shelf. It's incredible. Like, so you see him talk about how he creates the stuff that he creates. Taking all the context out, the cool robots or the cool colors and stuff are almost like irrelevant, because like you said, it's all in the shapes. And I want to see that video. I want to watch it because it sounds really interesting. And B, it's like, I almost say to Ramna, it's like, students, research a bit of this stuff like photography and like these kinds of concept art, what makes good. There's a series on Art Learning, Stephen Wuther, and his whole thing about like drawing, I can't remember what, something out chaos. He basically like throws a bunch of like shapes down and he finds compositions out of the shapes, and it's so interesting. And he like puts a big pyramid together explaining like shapes and then like detail, and like explains when students get it wrong. It's really, it's so, I think because that's the thing as well with like a lot of student art. I've had like, we do crash courses where it's like it's an hour long, and it'll be like, oh, can you help me re-render the scene? And they'll show me the scene. I'm like, oh, Jesus, this is a bit rough. And then I'm like, well, if you just move the camera here and just move it down and twist it a little bit and change your field of view and a slightly longer focal length and up your ISO a little bit. Oh, it's actually quite a good looking scene. You just had it was just being looked at in a bad way. And it's like, I don't think this is taught to students like in education very often. Like most of education focuses on like set software and stuff like this. Artistic eye stuff, I don't know many students who, without researching themselves, you could tell you what the golden ratio is all about and like how to compose a scene using a golden ratio. I think it's common knowledge to students. So it's like, I recommend that quite a lot, like getting an internet. I've learned a shit ton, and I thought I knew stuff.
I guess it depends a little bit on your background though, right? I suppose, because if you're more self-taught, it would definitely be worth sort of picking more of those traditional art skills like composition and color theory and shapes and all these things, right? But it depends, because for me, my background was, I went through an education system, and I was actually taught a lot of those things, like the composition side of it, like this golden ratio and the rule of thirds and all these things like composition rules. I was taught quite a lot of those types of things, like single point perspective. And so the course that I did went through that so we had a week, like an assignment a week. And then 1 week we would do single point perspective and do loads of drawings where we just did single point perspective. And then the next week it would be like 3-point perspective. And we went through and did the same thing, or went back to the same place, but did it as a 3-point perspective rather than a, single point perspective. And that more traditional aspect, I was really fortunate to go into that educational sort of direction, because if I didn't do that, I think I would be quite a different artist, not having that traditional background, and I think that was really important for sure.
Well, it's funny because you do give me the energy of a artist. Like you're even like, so you don't just churn like me. I just churn out mat balls. Same old, same old. You make like this cool, like you turn them into pieces of art in themselves, like self-respected art. Like when you make the mat balls into like little planets and little biomes. I just want to talk about that because that's one of the things I really like about your portfolio. It's probably my personal opinion, my favorite bit. It's got a lot of personality to them. Was that a case of you just like, because I know my wife has said this to me loads of times, oh, it looks like a planet when I show her a mat ball. And I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it does. Did someone say that to you once? You're like, oh, maybe I should make this a planet. And is that how it got there?
Yeah, do you know what? A little bit actually, because I was the reason I started that series was because I was doing the stuff we talked about before, where we were going more into growth, and I actually took a CGMA course myself. So I took a vegetation course because I wanted to like learn that skill a little bit more. And when I was doing it, because I was also working at the time, I didn't have a huge amount of time to dedicate in the assignments. It was sort of going towards making a final environment with portfolio, with vegetation and all this sort of stuff. So making a proper scene with plants and all this sort of stuff. And because I didn't have a huge amount of time, I was actually working on a material like a rocky kind of stone ground material at the time. And I thought this would be really cool if I could like take the vegetation and somehow turn this into like a little ecosystem. And very inspired by something like Little Big Planet. Yeah. If you've played that game, they have that kind of sort of visual, right? Where it's like a small planet orb ecosystem sphere thing. So that, I guess that was what inspired it. And then my girlfriend made the suggestion like, oh, well, maybe you could just make it a planet. And I was like, actually, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought about that. And then I spoke to the lecturer who was running the course and said, would you give me feedback if I did this? Would you give me feedback on it? Because I would really like to push into that and do a piece that's a material with all the plants and everything rendered on the top of it. And I did that. And then, just the people's response to it was overwhelmingly positive. Like lots of people reached out to me to say they liked it and thought it was a cool idea. And then, so then that sort of inspired me to do them more as a series going into the future when I did a few more of them and just pick up different ideas with those. So it was a little bit like you said, where it was not really much. I can't take full credit for it. It wasn't,
it's funny though, because when you mentioned like you're doing design and stuff and you're this rocky material, I find, even though I love material art, I'm starting to have a bit of a weird relationship with it. There's an Art Learning course going on soon where basically I talk about how like 100% designer thing is nonsense, and like I think that's why I liked that's what I liked about yours. It was so far removed from 100% designer. Although I get it, it was a planet and it was foliage and all this sort of stuff. It was like it's a piece of art in itself. Yes, it's a mat ball at first, but like it's has all these different elements. And, I started looking at stuff like using Quixel Mega Scans or whatever, ZBrush, Blender, doesn't really matter. But having that different take on material art, I think is what I really liked about it, because for the longest time, and I think it's a dangerous mindset. I mean, I had it for long. I did the same thing. I put like tags at the bottom of my descriptions. I did this 100% designer, thinking it meant anything. I look back now and I'm like, if you're doing 100% designer, it's probably like, I mean, it's cool, but it might be a bit of a waste of your time. It's like have you seen that dragon material going around an art station at the moment?
Yeah, I have seen it, yeah.
It's incredible, and it's like, oh yeah, had it in ZBrush and I took it into design. I'm like, yeah, you've saved yourself probably about 2 years. Because I know when I did that Baroque seal in the Collective Crew Cafe, that nearly killed me doing that 100% designer. That was painful. Like trying to get griffins and shit in designer. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And I look back and I'm like, why the fuck did I do that? I could have done that in ZBrush in like a couple of hours and then have a pretty close result, and I'm not half depressed. I think that's why it resonated with me with your stuff. It's like it was going beyond just design, and I think that's what I really enjoyed about it.
Yeah, I mean, I always tried with that one particularly. I wanted it to feel like it was still game ready assets, if that makes sense. Like it was, it sort of would be like an environment, but the closest thing to a material environment, if that sort of makes sense. And I think that's something that you see, this sort of 100% designer stuff is interesting, because for me, I think with games in general, a lot of the time now, our time scale to make games is like crazy, because we're making these amazing products with like loads of features and stuff. So we're trying to do things in general as quick as we can, you know, especially with like more of a production head. We want to try and like do things as quick as possible. So the software a lot of the time is just a tool to make the art as, you know, in the most efficient way possible. So I've done the same thing where I started making a material, like a fish material, and I'm making all the fish in Designer. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, I need to. And then I was thinking about how if I just did this in ZBrush, like the time I would save by doing it that way round, and picking the right tool for the job is really important, because it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Like, you're going to, you know, create a really nice piece of artwork, or, you know, you need to make something that's functional for a game, or, you know, CG or whatever it is. So it's just about, people don't look at it and go, oh, well, how did you make it? Like, what was your process? Like, if it's in a game, they just play the game, right? So
yeah.
It's sort of strange, I think, that we have that.
I mean, I say to students a lot, I'm like, you have to, it's like, it's understanding why you're doing it. Like, if you're going to do 100% designer, understand it's nothing but a flex. That's the only reason you're doing it. You're not doing it because it's the best workflow. You're just flexing, which is fine. Like, cool. I mean, I remember Ben said something to me. It was like, look, I've made materials in the past which are ridiculous. I did a Torfric like sci-fi wall, which was like, you'd model that in 2 seconds in 3ds Max. You did not need to make that material. And it's like, yeah, but you're showing your control over height and like your ability to like blend shapes, and like, yeah, okay, that I'm never gonna let you do that in production, but you're showing control, and like, cool, as long as you're okay with that, you understand that. But you do need the flip side of it in, which is realistic materials, which actually might be used in production, and showing some production skills. He's already like slapped some sense into me to start using Megascans. He was like, you could try make a bunch of leaves in design, and there's some beautiful leaves out there. I've seen some fantastic Substance Designer leaves, but he's like, you're gonna spend like what, a week, 2 weeks doing that, or you can just grab an atlas off Megascans and you're done in 20 seconds. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. I can't really argue that logic.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because with Designer, I've always thought about it as a way. The mentality I've always had with it is that if you're going to try and create something lots and lots and lots of times, then that's where Substance is super powerful. Like, if you want to make 600 versions of a leaf, then that's awesome. But the main kind of takeaway is that the skill you have to show to like make the shapes perfectly in Designer is the same skill you have to sculpt the leaf in ZBrush.
Yeah.
So that's the difference, right? You're going to go through a process of, it's going to be really hard for you, because you have to like use transforms to like line up each thing perfectly and whatever. And you're like, why am I doing this? And then, and that knowledge that you have to make the alpha and to do the height is all this exact same information you need to know to do a really nice sculpt, or to do, you know, take something from, I mean, Megascans is slightly different, but, you know, you still need to know how to balance it. You know, need to know how to do detail, lots of the same kind of skills. So I think that's the main thing to think about, isn't it, in terms of that aspect?
Megascans, you know what, I've had to like drill this in so often to people, like, you can't take Megascans at face value and just throw it in. Like, all of the Megascans in my materials, I'm having to like denoise the hell. I mean, that's why I hate Photoscans is cool. I've seen people do cool stuff with it, but it is some noisy stuff you get back from it. And I've had to like completely kill its normals and height and redo it and clean it up. And then like the amount of times I've had to do with it, like they'll throw some foliage into their scene, or like some rocks, and I'm like, it looks great if you're at the exact distance the camera was to capture that scan. As soon as you get a little bit closer or get a little bit further away, it breaks up. And you need to take it and do something with it. You can't just take stuff like straight out of the box of Megascans and then think it's going to be okay. Because, I mean, even with actual photos, taking like Megascans out of the equation, actual photo scan process, nearly every single time they're still having to take it to ZBrush and clean it up and denoise it, and then take the textures into Designer or Painter and clean them up too. It's like, it's such a good tool that people almost like, I think a lot of people don't understand how they should be using it. It's almost like when Painter first came out, I'm going to throw bronze armor on everything. And it's like, Or
Yeah,
machined, or was it oil machine, the yellow one with the oil slicks? Like,
yeah,
God,
yeah, yeah.
I've seen that plenty. And I'm like, you know, you need to take it a little bit further. You need to do a little bit more work into it. It's the exact same with
Yeah.
Megascans.
There's always a transition when new piece of software comes out where it takes a little while for really experienced artists to like get the amazing stuff out of it. Like you have the, the substance like kings that come in and do the amazing stuff, and then they learn how to use, the software and everything. And there's always a transition. But going back to what you said about the Megascan stuff, I had that exact thing firsthand doing my competition, because I took some Megascans for some rocks for the piece, and I put them in as like foreground. And so essentially just in the corners, I had like almost like a vignette of rocks where it just like around the edges. And because I was trying to do something that was fast in terms of time, I put the Megascans in and sort of had the conversation like mentally with myself that I would go back and replace these later. So I put them in with the plan to sort of replace them. And it was one of the last things that I did. So it was really interesting because the scene as a whole was almost finished by the time I did the replacement of the Megascans part. And what I found was that because the quality on the Megascans is so high, because they're basically a photo, it's like real life, it didn't look right with what I'd done, because everything else I'd made, I'd sort of hand sculpted, or I'd done like a pass in Substance Painter. So that I was able to control like what I wanted to do with the sculpts and, with the texturing. And I had like particular look to what I was going for, like more illustrative style to it. And so what I then did was take the scans, clean them up, resculpt them, retexture them, do like a whole new pass in that same style. And they almost look very similar in terms of like how I wanted them to look, but they just sit in the scene so much better. So that aspect of like making it work is the thing with those. I think you have to, if you're going to do a photo scan scene, then that's absolutely fine. You could just use all the mega scans you want to do and, all the decals and everything. But if you're going to make something that's more specific, like what I was trying to do with the challenge, then there might be a little bit of work where you have to put into that to hopefully sit things together nicely. I think that's important with your pieces.
Also, speaking to like Nate Stevens about it, the guy, the principal artist from Sony, and his issue with it was like just maintaining any form of text for him. Like, and with Sony, textual density is king. Like, it is the number one rule, and it's like photo scans in general is pretty much impossible to maintain on scale a consistent textual density, because where the camera's positioned from the object, it's always different when they're capturing it. And like, oh, okay, we need like this rock. Oh, well, I can just sculpt it up. Well, okay, now it's probably gonna have a different textual density to the photo scans. And it's like at scale, it's so hard to do photo scans well. I mean, there's some people who are ninjas at it, people like Embark and Dice, and their whole studio is framed around this one thing, and that's what allows them to be complete ninjas at what they do. But it is so difficult. Like, you can't. I've tried it myself. Like, I've tried downloading just a library of Megascans. That Stairway to Heaven scene was a nightmare, because I downloaded a bunch of decals, and like in the viewer, they look great. I was like, oh, this is gonna look so cool. Put them in, and I'm like, it's a noisy, grainy mess. I'm like, shit, I have to like take these into Photoshop and clean them up and try and make them not look so nasty. This is very much a balancing act. It's a painful balancing act, but it's I think it's very necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said about the textile density is interesting, actually, because I think it actually that also just comes a little bit from the fact that you didn't make it yourself. So if you didn't make it, you don't really know what the textile density is. So because somebody else would have like authored it, you don't know what they were working to, because you weren't there when they made it, probably. So I think that aspect is, if you're doing your own thing, you're obviously very much in control of textile density, and that's as you were saying with Nate, I think that's a super important thing. I didn't realize until very recently how important textile density was. And then you find out the hard way, and then you learn how important that is. And then when you do it, it's one of those things where it's sort of like you can't tell why something is off, but the reason it's off, and that's, exactly. It's that exact thing. And textile density is the number one reason for that, I think.
Yeah, the amount of time, like, it's basically the environment art version of Uncanny Valley. It's like the amount of times I've like looked at someone, I'm like, Someone feels like I remember I saw one. There was a scene and had like a big archway. And it was like I think I counted 4 or 5 different textual densities. Where does the resolution was changing, level of detail was changing. This is a very long, this big expansive area in a desert, and I was kind of looking like, it is shortly after Nate Stevens' podcast as well, so it's on my mind anyway. I was looking, I was like, oh, that's why it feels weird. Like, they're scan assets, they're scaled up scan assets, they're sculpted assets, and that's a designer material, and they're all different textual densities. And I was like, okay, that's why it feels weird. I mean, when I blur my eyes, like, it looked fine. When you actually look and you start observing the image, I'm like, why does this feel weird? Oh, that's why. It's because of X, Y, and Z. It's very, it's annoying because it's another little thing in your head that you're like, okay, why does this image look wrong? Okay, well, we already talked about composition and lighting and props, and now textual density, and there'll probably be like, I'll probably be in 2 years' time, there'll be another little thing I need to be aware of going forward. But speaking of going forward, brings us tightly in a nice little bow. I know you said you listened to a lot of podcasts in the past. I like to ask interesting questions at the end. So the thing I've sort of early on in the podcast, I was always looking back. I don't want to look back anymore. I look forward. So like through 2021, what sort of things are you looking to develop, either as an artist or as a person? What sort of things are you hoping to level up in?
Yeah, so it's tricky because at the moment I've basically been doing more of a project series thing. This is what I've been trying to do in my personal work. So along the Simon Stalenhag theme that we talked about earlier, I wanted to try and find something that I really love to create as an artist, something that just I'm passionate about as a project. And so I kind of fallen into this project series where I'm making Mech, where it's a character that runs through the series of environments, and there's a narrative element to it. So the character for the robot is looking after a little child, a little girl, and he loses the little girl. And then throughout the different environment scenes, he's trying to track her down. Basically, that's my sort of general narrative. So it's really loose kind of thing, sort of dystopian style, different environments and everything. And I've been working on that project just on and off and just keep doing little bits and pieces for it. And I really want to sort of push more into that project. But one of the reasons why it's been going for a little while is because I've just really been loving doing it. I just really am enjoying it. Like, I've got that sort of flow. I know what I'm doing. I have I'm just super passionate about it. Always really want to work on it. It's never a chore, which is very rare, I think, to find something like that where you just, I'm just always wanting to do it. Even if I go away from it, which I have done in a few cases, and then come back and I'm still really wanting to do it, which is pretty cool. So that's my goal actually for this year, is to just essentially just still feel like that. I don't want that feeling to go away, because I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. And I think it comes down a lot to choosing something that I really love doing, and also trying to always learn and grow. And we spoke a lot about like teaching and those kind of things. And that's always been something that is super important to me. So I want to still feel like I'm challenged and still have places to grow, like things to learn and stuff that I want to push into, whether or not that's new software or whatever that is. So that's my goal really in terms of into the future.
Not bad goal. I look forward to seeing that. I know what you mean about enjoying the project. I was like that with this one. It's like I was like, you know, when you have a game you really enjoyed as a kid, and like you're waiting to school to finish and go home and play that game. I was like, it's when you're in that state, it makes projects so enjoyable. But man, dude, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for being patient with me. I know it's been a bit of a farce getting this to happen. Everybody listening, remember, I say the same every week. Please, like, share, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. The more we share the podcast, the more people get to hear the fantastic information the people like Ben have to share. Dude, I think we're done. I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed having the chat, and it was well worth the wait.
Well, that's good to know. I'll catch you next week, guys.